He once owned a culinary empire and lost himself in the process, until the edge of a scorched apple pie and a line written by hand called him back. No one knew who she was, but the scent of cinnamon from the pie she left behind stirred something in the whole city. There are memories that need no name, just the right taste once to remind us who we are, and sometimes the thing that changes everything is tucked inside a basket someone forgot. Evening settled over Vermont, like an old man making his way down a familiar lane, slow, deliberate, and full of memory. Late autumn in this part of the world didn't blaze with color. It whispered instead, with leaves the hue of burnt amber, drifting down onto wooden rooftops, catching briefly on the coats of those passing by. Daniel Hayes stood outside the town's farmer's market, his eyes dulled of curiosity. He wasn't new here. Years ago, as a culinary student, he'd come each fall for internships. But now, everything felt different. He was 34, a young millionaire, once the CEO of one of New York's most celebrated restaurant chains. They'd called him the master of taste reinvention. His face had graced magazines, his handshake inked million-dollar deals. The interviews all shared the same look, sharp-eyed, clipped, and relentlessly focused. But today, those eyes lingered on an old wooden sign scrawled by hand. Vermont Farmers Market, Sundays. Every stall holds a memory. He stepped in, not out of curiosity, but because he had nowhere else to go. Like someone returning to a place from their past, simply because they didn't know where else to begin. The first stall was apples, round, red, misted with dew. He picked one up, not quite seeing, but knowing by touch it was a Granny Smith. The taste memory returned. A tiny kitchen, the snap and hiss of an oven, a curly-haired assistant laughing after burning their first batch of pies. He moved on, past handmade bread, wild honey, strawberry preserves. Each stall looked like a dream carefully tucked into a corner of someone's heart. Daniel could feel the love in every item, but he couldn't seem to reach it until he saw the basket. It was tucked at the edge of the produce table, woven, a wicker unpainted, unvarnished, its rim frayed with time, maybe forgotten, maybe just left behind. He meant to take the plastic one beside it, but his hands reached out instead, lifting the old basket. There was something about its worn simplicity that wouldn't let him walk away. He bent to place some carrots and a bundle of kale inside. When he saw it, a folded note at the bottom, creased and slightly yellowed. No name, no branding. He opened it. The handwriting leaned softly, inked in gentle strokes, as if the person had written more with feeling than precision. Apple, pie, the taste of home. For those who've forgotten what their home once tasted like. The recipe followed. It called for a blend of 3 types of apples, not the prettiest ones, but those tart enough to calm, sweet enough to remember. The spices were humble: cinnamon, nutmeg, a touch of honey, an egg yolk, but it was the last line, smaller than the rest, that held him still. Don't be afraid to season with feeling. It might go wrong the first time, but the third pie is always the best. Daniel stood frozen. In that moment, all the million-dollar contracts, the pitch decks, the market forecasts became a foreign tongue. The only thing that felt close was that quiet, intimate line. He didn't know what made him buy the basket or gather the ingredients listed. He returned to the wooden cabin his family had rented on the edge of town, the one he thought he'd never need again, because his life had belonged elsewhere. The kitchen still smelled of damp wood. He turned on the oven, rinsed the apples, peeled them. His movements lacked the precision of New York's polished kitchens. Everything was slower, softer, like learning again for the first time. The first pie burned at the edges. The crust was dry, the flavor dull, the second too wet. The apples over-softened, the third he changed things a little. A bit more honey, lower heat, longer bake. And when it was done, he didn't try it right away. He sat down, watching it cool in silence. No one was there to critique it. No scores. No influencers live streaming their reactions. Just him in a quiet kitchen, as still as late autumn air. He took a bite. The crust cracked softly, not too crisp, not too limp. The filling gently spiced with the lightest thread of cinnamon and something else, something unnamed. Not delicious, exactly, just familiar. Suddenly, he remembered the way. His mother's pies used to smell, not perfect, but always waiting on the table when he came home. He remembered college nights baking with his freshman roommate, flour on the counter, laughter in the air, and he remembered himself. The version of Daniel who didn't calculate every move, who didn't weigh life in returns, who baked simply because he loved it. As night deepened, he stayed there, half-eaten pie beside him, the note unfolded, the inked words whispering across time. The third pie is always the best, and for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel empty, not perfect, but enough to want to try again. The kitchen in the little wooden house tucked deep in the Vermont woods had nothing remarkable about it. An old gas stove, a few pans swaying from iron hooks, and a small window overlooking a garden scattered with wild daisies. Yet that night, it became a stage for something Daniel hadn't expected, an unannounced homecoming. He opened each cabinet. Though he was only renting the place for a few days, it was surprisingly well stocked. Thankfully, Vermont was still a place where people loved the quiet beauty of cooking, not flashy appliances, just practical tools, likely kept by the owner for years. A gray glazed ceramic mixing bowl sat beneath the counter, silent, as if waiting. Daniel set the basket down on the table. The recipe note was still there, slightly curled, a bit smudged with vegetable dust. He smoothed it flat and placed a small stone to hold it in place. Then he began peeling apples. He chose 3 varieties, just like the note suggested. Honey Crisp for soft sweetness, Granny Smith for a hint of tartness, and a red one he couldn't name. Its skin rough and its flesh crisp. The sound of the knife tapping rhythmically against the board felt old. Not worn out, but familiar, in a way that had been distant for too long. Like the way he used to stand behind the kitchen counter in sophomore year, baking pies with his friend Mika. Both of them laughing hard after burning the crust, still eating every crumb anyway. Honey, cinnamon, nutmeg. The scent of cinnamon rose as soon as he folded it into the apple mixture. It wasn't sharp, not piercing, just gentle, like an unexpected hug from behind. Daniel paused. A thin plume of steam drifted from a pot on the stove, fogging the small window. The smell of cinnamon curled through the air. In that moment, the world held still. He closed his eyes and remembered. He didn't know why, but his mind wandered back to a fall afternoon in 2007. His mother, her hair already graying, stood beside a tiny oven in their suburban kitchen. She wasn't a great cook, but whenever guests came, she made that apple pie. Not because it was delicious, but because the cinnamon made the house feel warm. Then came another image, a small apartment in Brooklyn, where he once lived with an old girlfriend. One Christmas Eve, he'd baked a pie to impress her. It came out burnt. She laughed and said, "This proves you're someone who really tries." The kitchen now felt dense with memory, though none of it overwhelmed. It filtered in slowly, quietly, like a scent carried on the wind. He baked the first pie, the clock read 10 p.m. when it came out. The crust had burned slightly, the filling wasn't quite set. Daniel tasted it, nodded. Not bad, but not right. The second attempt was better, but still missing something he couldn't name. Maybe sweetness and maybe soul. He stepped back, sank into a wooden chair, and watched the third pie rise in the oven. Night passed slowly. The kitchen was bathed in soft golden light from a single bulb. No loud voices, no calendars chiming, no urgent emails. Just him and an apple pie, growing in the silence. Finally, the pie came out. This time, he didn't rush. He let it cool, poured a cup of tea, set the plate down gently, and sat. The crust was thin and lightly crisp, the filling warm, fragrant. Not too strong, but every bite left a trace of softness, of heat. It didn't taste perfect, not the perfection of a restaurant kitchen, but there was something deeply human about it. Daniel chewed slowly. Every time he closed his eyes, another memory flickered. As a boy, he once dreamed of becoming a chef, just to make his mother smile. But then life grew crowded. Everything became a project, a target, a spreadsheet. He had spent so much time building something, he forgot why he ever began. Now, in a small kitchen guided by a handwritten recipe and a simple pie, he remembered, not as a CEO, not as the young millionaire in magazine spreads, but as Daniel Hayes, the boy who once felt something stir because of a hand-lettered note, who burned the first pie but tried again, simply because he wanted to feel something true. And that pie didn't just taste of cinnamon and honey, it tasted of memory, gently rewarmed by sincerity. Morning in Vermont clung to the trees like breath held overnight, leaving behind a thin veil of frost, like the dusting of sugar on last night's pie. Daniel woke early, not to the chime of an alarm, not to the pull of a packed schedule, but to something quiet stirring inside him. The feeling left by the third pie still lingered, unresolved, like a musical note left hanging, and it wouldn't let him look away. He stepped out of the cabin, pulling on the rough wool sweater he once swore he'd never wear. His shoes were dusted with soil now, and his hands, more used to ink and signatures than flour and spice, reached instinctively for the small note that had somehow shifted something in him. He kept it folded carefully, tucked in the breast, pocket of his sweater like a forgotten love letter. No name and no address, nothing but a few gentle lines. Don't be afraid to season with feeling. The words wouldn't let him go. Daniel returned to the market, which yesterday had seemed like coincidence and today felt more like a promise or a question still waiting for its answer. He began at the place where the basket had been. The woman running the produce stall, sun-browned and in her 50s, shook her head. That basket. People leave old ones all the time. Who wrote that? I wouldn't know. He moved. On to the bread vendor. A man with flour on his apron chuckled when Daniel showed him the note. Pretty writing. Not mine, though. If I wrote it, you'd think a chicken had danced across the page. The honey stall was quiet. An elderly couple behind the table smiled kindly but could only shrug. A younger woman at the dried flower stand raised an eyebrow, curious. No signature. No. Then maybe they didn't want to be found. He paused. Something stung behind his eyes, not from rejection but from realizing someone had left behind something so beautiful and hadn't asked to be thanked. In his world, where every idea was trademarked, every contribution logged and calculated, this was almost incomprehensible. He wandered to the far end of the market, where there were fewer people. A modest corner with a scattering of jam, jars and small parcels of cookies wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. This stall didn't look like it was selling anything, more like someone had set it up because they couldn't keep it to themselves. No one stood behind it. Was about to walk away when a voice soft as wind through branches came from behind, looking for someone. He turned. An elderly woman, hair silver and neat, wearing a lamb's wool cardigan that was worn but clean. Her eyes were bright, her nose fine and straight, her face mapped with the lines of someone who had laughed a lot in her life. Daniel hesitated for just a moment, then held out the note. No long explanation, no justifying why he had it. She looked at it without speaking. Then, rather than answer, she asked, "How was the pie?" Daniel smiled, softer than he expected. "The first one burned, the second was missing something, and the third wing still not perfect, but I don't think I've ever enjoyed baking more." She nodded, her eyes narrowing, not at the paper, but at the man holding it, as if she were reading the spaces between his words. "Could be Emma," she said. "Emma. Girl who sells pies over on the east side of the market. Doesn't put her name on anything, doesn't take regulars. Leaves recipes in paper bags like people toss letters into a river. Light as that. And now, don't know. She comes and goes. Sometimes she bakes, then disappears. Shy thing." Daniel stood still. The name, Emma, sounded like a melody half remembered. Not complex, not ornate. Just something that, when heard, made you feel like you should remember it. He looked down at the note in his hand. Small script, faint traces, and a story not yet told. Just a scrap of paper. But he knew he had stepped into something far, more real than any contract he'd ever signed, and he wouldn't leave. not until he found the one who had written it. The Vermont farmers' market felt different that morning, not because the air had changed or the stalls rearranged, but because Daniel, for the first time in a long while, wasn't walking with the intention to buy something. He was looking for someone he'd never met, didn't know by name, and yet somehow she had rewritten a quiet rhythm inside his heart. He made his way to the eastern corner of the market, the one the old woman had mentioned. Amid the vibrant chaos of color and voices, there was a wooden table, its surface stained with ink and softened with age. Behind it, a young woman packed pastries into brown paper bags. No sign, no sales pitch. Everything about the scene was still understated. She didn't look up as he approached. Her long brown hair was tied back simply, her beige coat slightly worn at the cuffs. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, folding each bag like a letter sent out into the world, not expecting an answer. Daniel paused a few steps away, reluctant to interrupt. He glanced at the offerings, apple pies, cinnamon rolls, and small powdered cookies he couldn't quite name. Each bag had a folded note sealed with a strip of simple tape. He realized this was how she shared her recipes. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Emma?" She looked up. Her eyes were a clear, quiet brown, deep, watchful. Not surprised, not guarded. Just a steady gaze, neither open nor shut. "Yes." Just one word. Short, like her, spare and full of things unsaid. Daniel stepped closer, pulling the note from his pocket. He held it out with both hands as if offering something fragile and precious. "This recipe, I found it in an old basket. I tried it, and I just wanted to say thank you." She looked at the paper, her brow knitting, not with confusion but recollection. Then she smiled barely, like the sound of a crust cracking in the oven. "Oh, I sometimes tuck those into baskets, like tossing letters into a river." "Letters into a river?" She nodded, her hands never stopping. "No reply needed. I just hope someone reads them." Daniel stood in silence. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him like that. Slowly, without angles, without the machinery of persuasion, a kind of conversation with no goal but to be honest, to be real. He picked up a bag of cinnamon rolls, opened the flap. "Read the note tucked inside. Cinnamon rolls don't have to be perfect, just warm enough to remind someone of a morning they once loved." He exhaled, not from any grand revelation, just because so many things inside him, buried under contracts and campaigns, had started to loosen, to drift. "Do you know," he said quietly, "you helped me bake the third pie again." She looked up, a question in her eyes. "The third one's always the best," he added, smiling. A smile flickered across her lips. Not wide, not certain, just a nod, enough to say she understood. Daniel bought a few more bags. He didn't ask for her number, didn't hand her a card. He simply said, "I'll come back, if you're still sending letters downriver." And when he turned to go, she bent her head again, folding another bag. Quiet. But in the one he carried there was a different note, folded in two, inked in brown, the script slanted and familiar. If someone ever forgets why they began, maybe they should start again by baking. Emma left no name, only cinnamon in the air and a gentle rhythm in someone else's heart. Rain tapped gently on the wooden eaves, brushing against the yellowing maple leaves like a final stroke on a painting already complete. Early winter in Vermont no longer held the crisp clarity of a fall postcard, but instead carried the quiet grace of someone who had once been hurt and still found a way to smile. Daniel returned to the market 2 days later, not for the pastries, not for nostalgia, but with a decision. He had thought it through. There was something in the way Emma wrote those small notes, in her unassuming presence, in those imperfect pastries with their cracked edges and honest flavor, that made things clearer than anything had in years. If he was going to begin again, it could only be by beginning with her. She was there in her usual corner, at that same worn wooden table. Her eyes were lowered, folding paper bags as if folding steady breaths. When he approached, she looked Up. A flicker of surprise, but no confusion. You already finished the pastries? She asked, her voice still as soft as before. Not just finished them. I thought about them all night, he smiled. Emma, I have a proposition. It might be a little sudden. She tilted her head, waiting, without judgment. He went on. I want to start a new line of restaurants, not upscale, no cookie-cutter franchises. Just small, warm places where each dish is handwritten, like yours. No heavy PR, no Michelin stars, just food. That makes people remember something. Emma said nothing at first. Her hand rested on an open bag she hadn't yet sealed. A breeze lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. Would you be head chef for it? He asked, openly. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it held the weight of the rain on the roof. No. The answer came gently, but clearly as Daniel paused, not from offense, but because he hadn't expected something so simple. He almost asked why, but stopped. There was something in her gaze, guarded but not cold, that told him if. She wanted to explain, she would. Emma set the bag aside and motioned for him to sit. He did, and then she spoke, voice quiet, like she was unfolding a story she hadn't touched in a long time. Once, I gave a recipe to a bakery I worked at. No name on it, just a small idea. Lemon filling with orange zest and a note that said, "Lemon bites like missing someone who's no longer there." She paused, eyes distant, not sad, but deep. They used the recipe, renamed it, cut the note, turned it into a bestseller. And when people called it professional, I realized it wasn't me anymore. Daniel said nothing. He just listened. Sometimes listening is the only way to really touch someone. She turned back to him. Her eyes were clear, not confident, but full of a light that belonged to someone who still believed in things, but needed the right to protect them. If I join, every recipe stays exactly as I wrote it. The handwriting, the tone, even the little notes that seem unnecessary. And no press, no photos, no interviews. Daniel smiled, a real one this time. Like someone who had found something far more valuable than capital, you'll have full say. And if just one person understands a dish, it's still worth serving. Emma nodded, not yes, not a handshake. Just a nod, the kind of nod that's enough to begin again. When Daniel walked away, the rain had stopped, not because the sky had cleared, but because something inside him had. In his coat pocket was another note, the scent of pastry still, clinging faintly to it. If a dish doesn't make someone remember something, then no matter how perfect it is, it's still a sad dish. The first shop opened on a morning shrouded in soft mist, with condensation still clinging to the window panes. The hand-carved wooden sign read only 2 words, Thu Bep, kitchen letters. No slogan, no logo, no owner's name. Just a place where people came to eat and to remember. In the small kitchen tucked behind the counter, Emma stood beside the oven, cotton gloves on her hands, her hair tied back as always. The scent of cinnamon and butter drifted through, the room mingling with the smell of damp wood and brown paper. Each pastry was wrapped by hand, one at a time, each with a folded note inside, sometimes a recipe, sometimes just a few scattered lines. Sometimes sweetness arrives last, when we've waited long enough. Not every day needs to be complete, just offer a spoonful of calm. This one's a little burnt on the edge. Maybe we are too, and still we go on. The customers came, steadily. Not in floods, but with intention. Word spread of a strange little bakery that didn't post curated photos, didn't live stream, didn't try to be famous. But those who came left changed, as if someone had quietly opened an old drawer in their heart. A week later, a video appeared. Online, the title read, "What's behind the handwritten bakery that's making a city cry?" The creator was a well-known food vlogger, famous for exploring healing spaces. In the video, she sat in the shop, reading a note that had come with her pastry. She took a bite and cried. The video went viral. Thousands of shares. Emotional comments. The hashtag #TarThubep exploded. Then came the backlash. Speculation grew. Who's behind this? Why won't they show the baker's face? Could this be a covert campaign from some savvy marketing firm? Another video surfaced. Beautifully fake. Is Thu Bep just a clever strategy? It dissected camera angles, fonts. On the notes, hypothesized about emotional engineering funded by a hidden company. Emma didn't use social media much, but a friend sent her a screenshot. The shop labeled "Suspicious Anonymity." She went still when she saw it. Not out of anger, but fear. That evening in the kitchen, she paused mid-motion, the cinnamon held in her hand above a tray of pies. Daniel walked by, catching her frozen beside the oven, the scent not yet released. "What's wrong?" he asked. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "I think maybe I should stop." Daniel looked at her, not surprised but understanding. He had anticipated this moment, just not so soon. "I'm not afraid of people knowing the pastries," she went on. "I'm just afraid they'll come for a story someone invented, that no one will show up anymore just because they want to eat something written by hand." "So you think they come for the story?" Daniel asked gently. "I don't know," Emma whispered. "But if one day I'm told to write a recipe just viral enough, then it all breaks." Daniel didn't argue. He quietly pulled open a drawer and took out a sheet of paper, a copy of the first recipe Emma had ever written. He placed it on the table. The third pie, he said, still wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make someone who thought he'd never touch a kitchen again remember why he ever loved it. Emma lowered her head. After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't want my name known. I don't want my face to be a symbol. If we continue, I need to be invisible. I need to be the letter writer, not the person on stage." Daniel nodded. No promises, no declarations, just a silent agreement. So they stepped back. The official website for Thu Bep was quietly revised. No About Us page. Each post featured only a photo of a pastry, a table corner, or a line of handwritten script. Emma kept baking, not to be seen, not to be famous, but to keep something intact, a quiet breath held steady in a world too loud. That afternoon, Vermont looked washed clean by the night's rain. The air was sharp and clear, dry leaves swept from the sidewalks. The front window of Thu Bep reflected a pale sky, neither gloomy nor bright, much like the story unfolding. Between them now, directionless perhaps, but slowly softening. Emma was still working in the back kitchen, but she was no longer the same as in the early days. Her eyes moved with more caution, her hands slowed as she wrote each note. The short lines she used to pen with ease now carried the weight of having once been misunderstood. Something inside her, though not broken, had drawn inward, like petals folding against a strong wind. Daniel saw it. He didn't blame her. But he couldn't let this end like a letter discarded over a misread sentence. That morning, standing in the shop, he turned to the manager and said, "We're hosting a tasting." The manager blinked. "What kind of tasting?" "No." "Kind," Daniel smiled. "Just one rule, no one knows who made what. No talking, no names, just taste and the memories it brings." 2 days later, the event took place in a wooden room on the edge of the forest. No banners, no influencers, no press. Invitations were handwritten on folded cards that read, "Not everyone needs to know your name, but someone might remember you. By taste." The room glowed under soft golden lights. Rough wooden tables held 3 plates each. No labels, no menus, no descriptions. Guests were invited to sit quietly, taste each pastry, and write a single line about what it reminded them of. Emma didn't attend. Daniel didn't ask her to. But before he left the shop that morning, she left a basket by the door, inside a small apple pie and a note. "If someone remembers you, there's no need for a name." The tasting unfolded in a silence that was oddly beautiful. No cameras, clicking, no lively debate, just people and pastries, and the hush between slow bites. Someone wrote, "This tastes like the day my mother hugged me goodbye before I left for college." Another. "The second one brought back my dad's. Old kitchen Sunday mornings, him humming while he baked. At the end, Daniel stood, no podium, no spotlight. He spoke quietly like he was telling something to himself. Someone asked me why I don't reveal the name of the person behind these pastries. Why keep it a secret? I used to think success meant building a brand. Getting the name out. He paused, looked into the stillness of the room. But then I realized, a name doesn't carry memory. Flavor does. No applause followed, only silence, the kind that lets something settle deep. That night, Daniel returned to the shop. Emma was washing trays, her hair falling loose around her face. She didn't ask anything. He placed a single piece of paper on the table, written by one of the tasters. "Thank you to the one who never showed their face but made me remember I was once the happiest child with a warm slice of pie." Emma read it. Her hands stilled. She didn't smile. Didn't cry. Only her eyes shifted, less guarded now, like petals slowly opening again. The set was quiet. No grand studio lights, no glare forcing squints. Everything was arranged like an old reading room. A wooden bookshelf, a velvet armchair in moss green, a low vase of dried flowers in the background. And Daniel Hayes, once a face on the cover of finance magazines, now sat in a plain shirt, the watch his mother had given him still on his wrist, looking into the camera with a calm, open gaze. "One last question, Mr. Hayes," the interviewer smiled, her voice like the beginning of a story. "Why did you decide not to reveal the identity of the creator behind Thu Bep's emotional recipe system? That's what everyone wants to know." Daniel looked down at the cup of tea, now cold. He wasn't thinking. He was remembering. "Once," he said, "I found a handwritten note in an old basket at the farmer's market. It was a recipe for apple pie. No name. Just one line at the end. Don't be afraid to season with feeling. The first time might go wrong, but the third pie is always the best." He looked up, the faintest smile in his eyes. "That night, I baked. The first one burned. The second was bland, but the third—" He paused, eyes drifting, as if the pie was still warm on a kitchen table somewhere deep in the Vermont woods. "The third reminded me why I ever learned to cook. Not to open a restaurant chain, not to build an empire, but because I once saw my mother's eyes light up when she cut into a pie I'd baked, even though the crust was scorched." The interviewer said nothing. The camera crew didn't interrupt. The room held the hush of a note that had just begun to echo. Daniel continued, his voice softer now. "That's why I never announced who wrote those recipes. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing is not knowing who stirred a feeling inside you, just knowing that you felt it." The interview ended. But Daniel didn't go back to his office. Instead, he turned off the main road, back to the Vermont farmers market, not to look for anything, but to leave something behind. In the same corner where he'd once found the basket, now a new produce stand, a small space sat empty at the edge of the table. Daniel placed a wicker basket there, old but clean. Inside, a brown paper bag held a warm apple pie, carefully wrapped. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "The third time is always the best. No name, no logo." The next morning, Emma received the basket. She knew instantly, not from the handwriting or the paper, but from the scent. It was the same. As that night in the little kitchen, when Daniel told her about trying again, she sat on the steps outside her home, pie in hand, not eating it yet, just holding it. That feeling of being remembered without being named, of being trusted without needing to prove a thing. Maybe that's how those who heal others finally get healed in return. She opened the note again. "The third time is always the best." And she smiled softly, like the last breath of winter folding closed, leaving behind the hush before spring. Thank you for walking this story with us, not to remember a name, but to remember yourself. If a pastry ever made you pause, even once like this video, and if you believe like we do that every memory deserves to be told, subscribe, because some things are small, but reach deep. A shy girl leaves her umbrella behind in the rain, and the one who finds it is a millionaire who vanished from the public eye after a plagiarism scandal. On the handle, just a single line of text, yet it forces him to confront the truth he's been avoiding for 3 long years. They don't know each other, but beneath quiet passing rains, a story begins to rewrite itself through a kind of understanding that needs no name. If you've ever carried something you couldn't bring yourself to say, maybe, just maybe, you'll see yourself in this story. The rain began at 4 in the afternoon, not violent, but not gentle either. It fell as if someone up in the sky had grown weary of sighing and their breath had turned into drops, heavy, deliberate, falling against the tin awning of a small cafe on the corner of Fremont Street, Seattle. Each drop met the uneven sidewalk with a soft percussion, steady as a soundtrack for anyone who had paused in their day. Across the street, Lara stood beneath the overhang of the old bookstore where she worked. Her thin sweater clung damply to her shoulders. She hadn't planned to stop by the cafe today, but the rain nudged her toward a different route. The awning at the bookstore was narrow, and she didn't like being seen, a slender figure with tangled hair, hands clutching the strap of her bag like she might slip away without it. She crossed the street when traffic thinned. Rain spattered up her jeans to her ankles. At the cafe steps, she quickly folded her cream-colored umbrella, now yellowed with time, and set it down. Her left hand trembled slightly, as it always did, after long days of quiet, simmering fatigue. The cafe door opened with a breath of warmth and fog. The smell of coffee mingled with the hush of strangers, the clink of spoons against ceramic. She stepped inside, leaving her old umbrella just outside the door, right at the threshold like she always did. No one paid her much attention. And that was something Lara had always been grateful for. She ordered a black tea and found a corner by the window, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to watch the rain washing sound from the world. Time slowed inside the cafe, as if the clock had grown tired. Lara didn't check her phone or glance at her messages. She simply placed her copy of Bird by Anne Lamott on the table, brushing her fingertips over the pages as though searching for a line that might rescue this day from drifting into nothing. About 20 minutes later, the cafe door opened again. A man stepped in, his dark wool coat heavy with rain, shoulders slightly bowed. He ran a hand through wet hair and swept his gaze across the room, not urgently but not indifferently. Those amber eyes seemed practiced in watching without being watched. His name was Caleb Rayner. 3 years ago, his name was on book covers and magazine spreads. Now, only those who had read closely, who had once believed in words deeply, would remember it, a half-buried memory. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar. Then turned toward the window, the same direction as the forgotten cream-colored umbrella. He paused when he saw a young man reaching for it, perhaps thinking to use it as shelter for his exit. The man smiled when no one claimed it. Caleb raised his hand slightly. That umbrella might belong to someone who just stepped in. It seems specific. He didn't know why he said that. Maybe it was the color, soft cream, fading. Maybe it was the way it had been placed, not dropped but left behind. Deliberately, the man nodded and moved on. Caleb picked up the umbrella. It was light as breath, damp and cool. On the handle, clinging beneath rainwater and the folds of soaked paper, was a small note. He peeled it away gently. The ink had blurred, but one line still emerged, faint but intact. "If you found this umbrella, please keep it. I don't need it anymore." Some things deserve to be protected by someone who still believes in kindness. Caleb stood there for a long time. He had written something like that once, back when he was still a different man, before he was called a plagiarist in the icy tone of headlines, before his closest friend, the one he used to write with, had died. He held the umbrella like a question still unanswered, a whisper from someone he'd never met, yet it stirred something deeper than anything he'd read lately. He asked the barista, "The girl who left this umbrella, do you know her?" The young woman shook her head, then paused. "There's her girl, long hair, grey sweater. She comes in sometimes and sits quietly, reads." Maybe it was her. Caleb nodded, noted it. He returned to his seat. set the umbrella beside his foot. His coffee had gone cold, but he still held the paper in his hand, as if letting it go might cause it to vanish with the rain. In another corner, Lara rose to leave. She didn't notice the man now silently guarding her forgotten umbrella. Didn't see the eyes that followed her, as if they had glimpsed something worth understanding. She stepped into the street, without an umbrella, but didn't look back. She thought, perhaps she truly didn't need it anymore, because sometimes leaving something behind is how you let it find someone who needs it more, or maybe simply you no longer have a reason to keep it. And so, the rain kept falling. But somewhere, something strange had begun to form. From an object everyone thought was ordinary, an umbrella left behind. The rain in Seattle in early autumn isn't like rain elsewhere. It doesn't come in torrents. It doesn't soak you with a grief you can name. It lingers, like a thought not yet spoken. And Caleb had returned to the old cafe 3 days in a row, through 3 steady rains, waiting for someone whose face he didn't even know. The umbrella still sat on the wooden chair in the far corner, right where he had left it, after carefully drying it. The note once clinging to its handle had been flattened, preserved in his wallet like a letter with no sender. No name, no number, nothing but the line, "If you found this umbrella, please keep it." And Caleb still couldn't look away from those words. There was something about the note that made him feel seen, as if the writer understood what it meant to let go of something too heavy, while still hoping someone out there might hold it for you. Each time he came, he asked the cafe staff, All they remembered was the vague outline of a girl, long hair, pale skin, quiet, always alone, always at the window reading. Did she leave her name? Anything? Caleb asked on his 3rd visit. The barista shook her head, then paused. Actually, the other day after she left, I found a slip of paper tucked under her book. I threw it away, though. Caleb went quiet for a moment, then smiled gently. It's okay. Thank you. But he hadn't let it go. That evening, back in his ivy-covered attic apartment, Caleb sat still before the umbrella, dry now, resting on the table like a relic of something half-remembered. He didn't know what he was searching for anymore, but he opened it anyway, carefully, like unfolding a wartime letter, and when the desk lamp passed through the soft yellowed fabric, he saw it. A faint stain of ink near the transparent plastic of the handle, tiny, nearly invisible. Caleb leaned in, reached for his magnifying glass, the one he used for old manuscripts, and examined it closely. Beneath the layer of clear plastic, barely visible, was a single line written at a slant. It looked like it had been written with a soft pencil, then sealed in by the plastic. Lara M. Just a name. No surname. No address. But for Caleb, a man who had lived a life in words, it wasn't just a name. It was a trail, a sign, a pinpoint on the map leading towards something that mattered. He closed his eyes and repeated it in his mind. Lara. 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 And from that moment, the name became a place he returned to whenever his thoughts wandered through questions without answers. The next day, Caleb went back to the cafe, the umbrella in hand. Rain again, light but thick. Condensation blurred the cafe windows like unspoken sadness, fogging up a corner of the city. He placed the umbrella on the table, across from the seat she used to take, the one he'd never seen anyone sit in. His coffee came. He didn't drink it. He just watched the rain. An elderly couple split a slice of apple pie. A child counted raindrops in a way only children can. And Caleb, a writer who once had everything, wanted only to find someone to ask one simple question. Why did you write that? Not because he believed the note was meant for him, but because he needed to know. Was there anyone else out there who also felt the ache of leaving something behind they no longer had the strength to carry? As night fell, he stood up. The umbrella still rested on the table. He decided he would take it with him. The rain had eased. He stepped outside and opened the umbrella, not to shield himself from the drizzle, but as if holding up a giant folded letter, one that kept unspoken things safe from the world. And in a brief, delicate moment on the threshold of the cafe, the opened umbrella brushed lightly against someone stepping in. A slender girl in a grey sweater. Their eyes met. Lara didn't recognize Caleb, but her gaze caught for just half a second on the umbrella before she walked on as if unwilling to let anything show. Caleb stood still. He didn't call out. He wasn't sure. But the feeling, that strange pull, was like fate had leaned in to whisper a word in his ear, soft as ink bleeding in the rain. Lara. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt truly curious. In the days of rain that followed in Seattle, Caleb chose the same cafe, the same table by the window, at the same time each afternoon. Not too early, not too late. The hour when lonely people tend to appear, not to drink coffee, but to find a place where their loneliness doesn't feel so alone. And Lara came too. They didn't speak at first. Two strangers, separated by a single empty table, both watching the rain, both choosing tea over coffee, both carrying in their eyes a shade of sorrow without a name. Caleb recognized her immediately, the girl who'd left behind the umbrella, the one he hadn't called out to though he'd wanted to. She didn't know who he was, and Caleb, for reasons he hadn't quite named, chose to keep it that way. The first time they truly spoke was on the third rainy afternoon. Lara walked in, her dark coat damp with scattered drops, a slim book in hand. She sat at her usual spot, across the window, where she had once left her umbrella behind. Caleb had arrived earlier, but this time, instead of pretending to read or scribble notes, he turned and smiled. "The tea here is never quite hot enough to chase off the cold," he said. "But sometimes it's just warm enough to make you forget it for a while." Lara blinked, slightly surprised. Not because the line was charming, it wasn't, but because it didn't sound like someone trying to start a conversation. It sounded like something said to no one in particular, light and unassuming. "I usually get the black tea," she replied softly. "It's just bitter enough to remind me I'm still alive." Caleb smiled. There was something about the way she spoke that made him feel small, not in the ordinary way, but in the way a man used to writing about others suddenly finds himself being written by someone else without their meaning to. "I'm Caleb," he said, but didn't add a last name. "Lara," she answered, and looked down at her book. Caleb tilted his head. "What are you reading?" She held out the cover, a worn paperback from his first year as a writer, the original edition, not the revised one. He stared at the title, then at her hands, slender, but holding the book as if afraid it might dissolve in her grip. "You like that one?" he asked, voice low. Lara nodded, then whispered, "There's a line in it I've never forgotten. I didn't write it because I believed it, but because I was afraid if I didn't, I'd forget I ever had." Caleb went still. That line had never been quoted in any review, never highlighted or praised. It was buried deep in a chapter, written one night when his heart had almost come undone, after his best friend, his co-writer, had walked out after a fight. Caleb had written it alone. He'd never thought anyone would remember. He took a breath, smiling with a quiet astonishment he didn't try to hide. "Not many people remember that line." Lara tilted her head. "I read like I'm searching for maps in the wreckage. That one felt like a map." In that moment, without music, without explanation, with only the sound of rain and two eyes meeting, it became clear to both of them. They were no longer strangers. Something had shifted, not loudly, but unmistakably. Caleb rested his hand on the tea. It wasn't hot, but it still held a trace of warmth. "If you found a line in a book that felt like something you once thought but never said, what would you do?" Lara answered without looking up. "I'd keep writing it, no matter who wrote the first line." He didn't know what else to say. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't try to steer the conversation. He let it drift, like the rain outside, soft, constant, carrying a rhythm that couldn't be put into words. When Lara stood to leave, Caleb stood too. She didn't notice, but as she walked out, leaving behind an empty chair and her tilted book on the table, Caleb simply looked at it and smiled. She remembered that line, he whispered, as if reminding himself that maybe, just maybe, what he once wrote was still being held by someone out there. The rain came earlier than usual on that sixth afternoon. Though it was only 3:30, the sky had already dimmed to dusk. The cafe on the corner of Fremont Street sat quieter than usual, just a scattering of solitary souls reaching for warmth in their cups and in the stillness. Caleb arrived early. He took his usual seat by the window, leaned back, and watched the world blur behind the fogged glass. The cream-colored umbrella was not with him today. He'd begun to realize he didn't need it anymore, because now he no longer came here to hide. He came to wait. Not long after, Lara walked in. She wore the same soft grey sweater, her hair tied low, neat as always. She nodded to Caleb, and something familiar flickered in her eyes, no longer guarded, just quietly known. They sat across from each other, and once again the rain was their gentle background music. This time Caleb brought a notebook, not to write, but to keep his hands from saying too much. Something in him had begun to want to be seen, and that want came with fear. Fear that if Lara knew who he was, this fragile thread between them might snap. "You seem like someone who used to write," Lara said softly, stirring her mint tea. "The way you ask things, the way you listen." Caleb gave a small smile. "I used to. Now, I'm relearning silence." They both laughed, lightly. But the quiet was broken too soon. A middle-aged man stepped into the cafe, dragging in the cold with him. His gait was stiff, his eyes scanning the room. When they landed on Caleb, they stopped. Caleb recognized that look. The man walked over, stopping at their table. No greeting, no smile. Just a question, pointed and plain, directed only at Caleb. "You're Caleb Rayner, aren't you?" Caleb froze. The man gave a thin, unfriendly smile. "I read your first book, and all the articles that came after." His gaze flicked to Lara for the briefest second. "Hope she knows who she's sitting with." Caleb said nothing. The man shrugged and turned to leave. But before the door swung shut behind him, he tossed one last remark over his shoulder, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Writing one true sentence takes talent. Living by it, that takes courage." The bell above the door rang and he was gone. The cafe went still. Lara didn't speak for a while. She stared at the rain. Then slowly, she turned to him, for the first time with a look that wasn't angry but searching, steady. "You're Caleb Rayner." Caleb swallowed, then nodded. "They say when you plagiarized," Lara said, her voice calm but filled with truth. He didn't defend himself, didn't deny it. Lara held his gaze. "Did you actually write that book?" Caleb leaned back. His hands clenched the notebook, then let it go. "I wrote some chapters," he said, "but not the best ones." He hesitated. "My friend, the one who passed, he wrote those." She was quiet. He kept going, his voice smaller. "Now, I didn't speak up, didn't deny it, but I didn't tell the truth either. I thought, if I stayed quiet, it would all fade." She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Silence can be a kind of lie too. No tears, no accusations, just a quiet disappointment that hollowed him out more than any fury ever could." She stood, slow and composed. He called, "Out, Lara." She turned back, her eyes softer than moments ago, but heavier too. "I'm not disappointed that you were wrong. I'm disappointed you didn't believe you could make it right." Then she walked away. The rain hadn't stopped. Caleb remained alone with a cooling cup of tea, an empty chair, and the reflection of her gaze still lingering on the window pane. He knew he had just lost something real. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something lift, like her words, even in their ache, had cracked open a final necessary door. That morning the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a familiar shade of ash, as if the entire city hadn't quite woken from a long night of restless dreams. Caleb drove out of town, not far, just enough to pull away from all the noise, the kind inside and out. He brought no laptop, no notebook, just a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and an old letter sealed in plastic, the edges wrinkled from the tears of a long-ago night. The cemetery rested on a low hill where his friend, the only person who had known the deepest layers of that first book, had been buried on a windless afternoon 3 years before. His name was Jonas. Caleb walked slowly across the damp grass. He hadn't returned since the funeral, partly because of the memories, partly because of the reflection he saw in the mirror afterward. Jonas had been his closest friend since college, the first to read his awkward early drafts, the one who edited every sentence in red ink, the one who wrote the parts where the characters told the truth, back when Caleb didn't yet have the courage to write his own. Jonas's name never appeared on the cover. That was something Caleb had never found a way to change, because by the time the book was released, Jonas was gone. A car crash, a rainy night, driving home after a pointless fight. Caleb never got to say sorry, never got to say goodbye. He stood before the simple headstone, which bore only a single line, Jonas Witt, keeper of unwritten stories. Laying the flowers down, Caleb sat on the damp ground. From inside his coat he pulled out the letter, Jonas's letter sent just a week before the accident. He'd never finished reading it. It opened the way Jonas always opened things, with a joke. If you're reading this because I'm dead, then sorry, but I still don't forgive you for letting me write the best part and still putting your name in the biggest font. Caleb laughed, but it caught in his throat, crumbling into silence. Then came the shaky, scrawled handwriting, words that struck like pins beneath the skin. I know you're scared. You're scared people will think you're not good enough. But Caleb, if you stay quiet, no one will ever know how hard you tried, even if you got it wrong. I don't need the credit. I just need you to look at what you've been avoiding. Caleb folded the letter and pressed it to his chest, holding it like someone he had never held long enough. Then he cried, not loud, just the gentle tremor of shoulders, eyes shut tight, as if afraid the flood within might swallow him whole. He sat there for a long time, no people, no music, no tragedy, but the one made of years of silence. A sparrow landed on a branch nearby. The wind swayed the trees in slow rhythm. There were no words from the earth, but inside Caleb, something began to clear. He reached for his phone and typed into his notes app. Silence is a kind of sin, too, especially when it hides the truth someone spent a lifetime trying to write. He didn't know who it was for, but it was the first line he'd written in 3 years. Not for anyone else to read, but for himself, to remember. On the drive back, Caleb left the music off. He didn't think about Lara. He didn't think about the man from the cafe, or the readers, or the publishers. There was only one line, slow and steady, echoing inside him, reminding him why he had once written at all. If I don't write it down, I'll forget I ever believed it. No one waited for him at the cafe that day, but there was a seat, empty, where Lara used to sit. Caleb placed a second bouquet there, another set of white petals, tousled by wind. No note, no explanation, just an act. Quiet, like a belated apology, meant with all his heart. That afternoon, the rain in Seattle didn't come down hard, but it lingered, as if the sky were trying to postpone something inevitable. The air was chilled, tinged with the damp scent of brick and rotting maple leaves, and everything seemed to move at half its usual pace. Caleb sat in the old cafe, the place where everything had begun, where a forgotten umbrella had once asked a question larger than any chapter he'd ever written. On the table before him was a cup of black tea, the kind Lara used to order. He had come here every day since telling the truth, but Lara hadn't returned. Not a word, not a note. She had vanished from the cafe as though she'd never been there at all, as if every conversation, every quiet moment between them had been nothing more than a flicker of memory imagined by someone desperate for connection. Rain clung to the window, blurring the world beyond, but Caleb kept watching, as if hoping the film reel of time might loop back to the moment people usually miss, too busy speaking to notice it. And then, in a breath of time so fine it blurred the line between memory and dream, he saw her. Lara. She stood across the street, just outside the glass. No umbrella. Her coat soaked, dark hair plastered to her forehead and collar. Her face was pale, but her eyes, they weren't angry, only still, and quietly sad. She didn't enter, didn't knock, didn't signal. She simply stepped to the edge of the cafe's stoop, the same place where Caleb had once picked up her umbrella. From her bag, she drew a small white envelope and gently tucked it into the curve of the umbrella's handle, the one Caleb had hung by the door, like something no longer in use, but not ready to be let go. Her hand brushed the handle, a tender parting. A farewell without words. Then she turned and walked away. Caleb shot to his feet, rushed outside, but by the time he reached the door, Lara was already down the block. She didn't look back, didn't hurry. She walked through the rain, as if it were the last place she still trusted to hold her. He watched her go, said nothing. Maybe because he understood. Some footsteps need to walk away. Some answers can only arrive when the one asking has finally stopped justifying the question. He bent down and picked up the envelope. White paper, handwriting soft and curved. "I'm not angry you kept the truth. I'm just sad you didn't believe you were worthy of redemption. The umbrella, you can keep it. But don't hold on to anything else that isn't true. I read that book many times, not because of who wrote it, but because it made me feel less alone. You did that once, and I still believe you can again. Write again. Not for others to believe, but so you can begin to live honestly. No name, no signature." But each word grazed his chest, not drawing blood, but deep enough for him to know he had been forgiven. Not with declarations, but with the gentlest silence. Caleb sat on the stoop, the letter in his hands. He didn't know how long he remained there, only that when he finally looked up, the rain still fell, but it no longer felt cold. Boy ran past, red jacket flashing through the mist, holding a small toy umbrella. When he saw Caleb sitting there, he stopped, looked at him and smiled. "Are you sad?" the boy asked. Caleb nodded slightly. "A little." The boy pulled a purple crayon from his pocket. "I have a pen. When I'm sad, I draw. You should try." Caleb accepted the crayon, stunned. A small gesture from a small stranger, like the final nudge from the universe reminding him, it's time, not to be published, not to reclaim glory, but to begin again, to live again, as himself, fully. He smiled, rose slowly, and stepped back inside. For the first time in years, Caleb opened his laptop, and he wrote, not a story, but a confession. In the only language he had ever truly trusted, the language of things left unsaid. That morning, the rain hadn't yet arrived. Seattle's sky seemed to have been dried overnight by wind, leaving behind pale streaks of cloud drifting slowly past the treetops. The air carried the scent of damp leaves, old books, and a faint trace of longing. Caleb returned to the cafe. He didn't know why, or rather, he no longer needed a reason. His feet had memorized the rhythm of the brick-lined street. His hand knew the feel of the creaking wooden door. But today, something was different. The moment he stepped inside, his eyes landed on something familiar, the cream-colored umbrella, placed exactly where it had once been left for him to find. And beside it this time, a small envelope. No one said a word. The barista simply smiled, soft and knowing, as if they'd all been waiting for this moment. Caleb walked over, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the letter. No fear now. No hesitation. He opened it right there, as if his heart had already been open for some time. The handwriting was familiar, light as a whisper. Caleb, I didn't come to say goodbye. I came to return what you once gave me. The feeling that someone out there understood, even if only through a few words. I read your new chapter. Even if it's just a draft, I knew it was real. Not because of the story, but because I could see you. For the first time, you let yourself be seen without hiding. I won't come back to this cafe. Not out of anger, but because I believe. The most beautiful things should remain where they first touched us. If you keep writing, don't write to be believed. Write the way you once made me quiet in the middle of a rainy afternoon. Lara. Caleb didn't cry. Instead, he smiled. A rare smile, unforced, free of sorrow. A strange stillness filled him, like every cell in his body had just been gently soothed. He held the umbrella in his hand and stood there for a long while. "Are you sad, mister?" The small voice came from a nearby table. Caleb turned. A boy, maybe 6, with wild hair and a dinosaur shirt, stared at him with eyes clear as water. "I'm sorry, what?" Caleb asked, surprised. "You look sad," the boy repeated, then pulled a worn purple crayon from his backpack and offered it to him. "When I'm sad, I draw the sun. You should try." Caleb bent down and took the crayon, smiling, not out of pain, but because for the first time he felt light. "Thank you," he said. The boy nodded solemnly and scampered back to his mother. Caleb sat down and placed the crayon atop the notebook he'd abandoned weeks ago. He didn't open it right away. He just rested his hand on the cover and closed his eyes. In his mind, Lara's final words echoed, "Write the way you once made me quiet in the middle of a rainy afternoon." And Caleb understood. Some letters don't need answers, but they're carried forever in the heart of the one who receives them. The rain began to fall, softly, as if the sky too had remembered how to breathe. And Caleb sat there, not hiding, not lying, not afraid of being seen, just being himself. The morning in Seattle was thick with fog. Sunlight hadn't yet reached the familiar corner table of the cafe, but Caleb was already there, laptop open, fingers brushing the keys, as if each word tapped gently against his own heart. No more character maps, no more high-stakes plots, no more invented personas to hide behind. He was writing himself. The new manuscript bore a simple title, The Ghost Behind the Lines. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a memoir. It was a letter, a long, quiet one, addressed to Jonas, to Lara, to anyone who had ever read something and felt understood without knowing why. In it, Caleb told the truth, that the best chapters weren't his, that they belonged to a friend who no longer walked the earth. That his silence hadn't come from deceit, but from the aching belief that he didn't deserve to make things right. He wrote about the umbrella, about the rain-soaked afternoons, about a girl who once left behind a line so simple it stopped him in his tracks after years of running. He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. Because this time, the name didn't matter. Weeks later, in a different city, one lined with narrow houses and salt-stung breezes drifting over rooftops, Lara opened the mailbox at her new apartment. Among the flyers and bills and folded catalogs was a thick, white envelope. No return address. She opened it. Inside was a manuscript, cleanly printed, carefully bound. The first page held no author's name, just a quote written in soft purple ink, the handwriting slightly smudged. Silence is a kind of sin, too, especially when it hides the truth someone spent a lifetime trying to write. Lara sat down on the front step, a calm afternoon unfolding around her. She read slowly, deliberately, each sentence feeling as though it had been written just for her, each paragraph spoken like a whisper near her ear. Halfway through, she laughed, not loudly but with her whole self. There were pieces of her in the pages, in questions, in glances, in quiet presences. But no name, no apologies, no final "I'm sorry" or "thank you," only truth, unadorned, gentle. Enough to make her believe that people could begin again, from the very first word. When she folded the manuscript closed, the sky had begun to turn. Rain threatened on the horizon, but she didn't stand. She closed her eyes, let the breeze stir her hair, let the rain kiss her face. No flinching, no hiding. Somewhere, perhaps, Caleb was sitting just the same, not writing now, but waiting. For rain, not to shield beneath an umbrella, but to remember the feeling of a sentence saving someone even when the writer never knew it had. The story doesn't end with an embrace or a reunion. It ends with an unsigned letter and a reader who no longer needs to ask who wrote this, because she knows the writer is the one who dared to tell the truth, even if it came late. And sometimes one person willing to do that is enough to keep us believing. Thank you for staying until the final page, where the quietest truths often echo the loudest. If you've been carrying a truth too long unsaid, remember, the bravest thing isn't being forgiven, It's being honest with yourself. And if this story made you pause even for a moment, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together through stories that heal, one word at a time.